Good morning, Mike. Let's talk about Spinnaker trimmers today. Looks like your view is lovely down there in Florida.
Yeah, down here near Sarasota, Florida. We're gonna get this nice little bay here, all kinds of birds and stuff. It's pretty cool.
I bet you know the breeze like the back of your hand on that little bay, don't you?
It's pretty shifty.
All right, so I've got a new Spinnaker trimmer come on board. Let's go through the steps on how to get him or her up to speed.
You know, I like when I have, even if it's a fairly inexperienced trimmer, I like them to understand what we're trying to accomplish. So instead of just say, hey, trim it to the curl and put the pole here, I want to have a conversation beforehand about what the theory is. And the big part of the theory is I think there's two different modes and they're both trimmed very differently, and it's worth discussing really quickly. So if we are looking at a top-down view here, you got your boat, right? There's two modes. One is a reach mode where the pole is forward and the spinnaker's here. And the interesting thing about the reach mode is that the wind flows across the spinnaker. So it feels a lot like a mainsail or a jib with the flow around the spinnaker. So the wind's going like this and the wind's going like this, you hope. The reality is it has trouble sticking to the back of the spinnaker, so it's really quite turbulent, but you're trying to get as much flow as you can. And then in run mode, it's a different deal. The run mode is the pole is back and the wind is back. So you kind of get rid of all this and you draw it again, the pole is back here and the spinnaker is like this. And in this case, the wind is actually flowing from the top down. It's not going across the spinnaker. It's kind of pushing you downwind. And it's actually pretty bad flow top down, but it's there. And just to give you an example of that, sometimes in heavy air, if you're sitting near the bow, if you're a bow person, Dave, you do a lot of bow, you see those little cat paws coming out from underneath the spinnaker right in front of the bow? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the flow coming down. That kind of showing you that it's not across the spinnaker because you wouldn't see that word there.
All right, so breeze coming in, you got this. So let's talk about the modes. I mean, what's the how do I know which mode I'm in? And I mean, what's the right mode for the right moment?
Yeah, so you're trying to make your way downwind. So if we redraw this completely, and let's make the wind from the top of the board, and I'll erase this here. So if the wind's coming down the top of the board, and in lighter air, if you just let the spinnaker push you, you're going to go pretty slow. And I kind of look at it as a hull speed thing. If you're below hull speed, you want to be in reach mode. So in reach mode, you're kind of like we drew before. Your boat looks like this, and the pole's forward, and you're going like that. And you're going angled. So you sail extra distance, not unlike you sail extra distance upwind, but you're going enough faster that it makes up for it. And so you're VMGing downwind. Then as it gets windier, you can, once you're near hull speed, sailing that extra distance doesn't make sense. You're not going to go that much faster by going in this reach mode. So in the reach mode, this flow over the sails, you're getting lift, kind of like an airplane, and you're getting, but in this, it's just kind of the wind starts pushing you downwind. You have a little bit of flow, but mostly you're just squaring off and you're VMGing by going straight down. If you go angles, you don't go much faster, so you just sail extra distance. In short, when it's light wind and I feel like I'm below hull speed, I'm in this reach mode. Once I near hull speed, I'm squaring off and going downwind.
Is some of that a sense of feel, or you working a lot on the speedo, presuming that you might have a speedo, or is this your human speedo?
Yeah, I think, if you're in a boat with no official speedo or you have your human speedo, which is really your feel. A lot of this is feel. You're in this mode, you think, hey, maybe it's windy enough. I'm reaching around, hey, the wind picked up, maybe I can square off. You try to square off and go down, you're like, oh, I'm just not moving. I just feel like I really slowed down. Like, okay, that didn't work, I better head up. Same with this, if you're going downwind, you're feeling great, it gets light, and if you're kind of in that transition and all of a sudden, drop 3 knots and you just feel your boat just dies. And a lot of it is I just feel it on my neck. If I'm not feeling flow on my neck, I gotta get into reaching up, including on this run mode. Like, because I'm just getting pushed down, the wind's faster than I'm going. I feel it on my neck. As soon as it slows down and I slow down and everybody's thing slows down, I feel like I got to get that, use how it feels on my neck and face a lot.
All right, so good to know that if you're going in for a bigger regatta, you got to cut off the mullet like I'd have, and you kind of like you want that bare neck, huh?
Yeah, well, there's something to said about that. I did some regatta. I felt really burned. It was this hot regatta, and I just stuck like one of those bandanas under my hat and put my hat on and covered my neck. And halfway through the race, I was doing terrible. I threw it down. Like, now I can feel the wind again.
All right, so when you're going in between those two modes, that's where the Spinnaker trimmer really comes in with being dynamic with the pole, and so maybe explain a little bit about what we should be doing with the pole height and fore and aft adjustments.
Absolutely. So let's start with the reach mode, and we'll blow up this boat again, going downwind in a nice reach mode, and you're doing angles, right? So for the most part, you're putting the pole pretty much forward. The apparent wind, what happens is the true wind's behind you, but since you're moving forward at a pretty good clip, the wind shifts forward, and it actually makes it so your apparent wind goes forward. And more or less, you're looking for the apparent wind to be 90 degrees to the pole, and you're steering to that. You want to pretty much put the pole all the way forward and keep the wind at 90 degrees to the boat, poles at 90 degrees to the wind, parallel to the boat. And you more or less can almost set it and cleat it there in light air. It changes if there's a big change in wind or if it gets in the transition. But, for the most part, you're doing that. You're just leaving it there. And then because you want to encourage flow over the Spinnaker, you really need this sheet really ease as much as you can. So there's a curl here to encourage this flow. Your enemy in this is over trimming, and you err on under trimming. I don't care if it folds quite a bit at the front edge. I'd rather it didn't, but I'd rather have it do that than go solid with no curl at all. As soon as you do that, the flow detaches on the back of the Spinnaker, and there's no flow at all. We did some wind tunnel studies with this, and it's amazing, even with your curling, how bad the flow is on the back of the Spinnaker. It detaches anyway. So you're doing everything you can to keep that at the crop. In short, this is the mode that the trimmer is basically leaving the pole blank, steady, and really playing the sheets, moving all the time to try to keep a curl.
All right, how about pole tip? I mean, there's a lot of debates, and I mean, at least on the J24, you've got the two rings or whatever you. So, what does the pole tip do to the leach profile, and how does that change things?
Yeah, so the first thing is you're setting the pole height so that you more or less want the clue and the tack more or less even height, and I like it a little bit down more at the tack than the clue. And it makes it look a little bit more like an asymmetric Spinnaker. It makes the front edge a little tighter, kind of like an asym, and the leach a little more open. I've had some really good sailors say the opposite. So you can't go wrong by making them even, and then you can kind of play with how you really want the height. My vote is down just a little bit from there, but even is a great start.
That could also be, I guess, the design of your Spinnaker as well.
Yeah, that could be it too. Some of these folks, if the leading edge is already pretty tight, maybe you want to loosen it up. You don't want it strapped either, so you need some give up there. So yeah, good point.
How about
yeah?
I say, how about the run mode here? Let's switch over. We've got the breezes built and we're ready to go downwind.
Yeah. So once you're in this run mode, I think you're trimming to something very different. So, back to our boat. You got your main all the way out now, and you got your pole all the way out, and you're really squaring off. And what I find is, you're trying to get this Spinnaker out from behind the main. So you're always trying to go lower and lower. But the trouble with that is if your Spinnaker's down here, it's blocked by the main. So I'm always trying to rotate it out. And so I'm always trying to ease the sheet but I need to get this out here, but I don't want it curling. I want to, so basically I'm easing it until it curls, and then I'm trimming it in until it doesn't. So it's the edge of curl, but not curling, I think is the perfect trim for a run. And I do think a lot of people get this wrong. They're so used to trimming to the curl on a reach that they kind of, they can't get out of that mindset. So with that, I think that you're basically also trying to square back the pole to help get the spinnaker out. So I like it, if the true wind's here, for example, or the parent wind's there, I like it actually squared back. This is where it would be if it was square to it. I'm always trying to get the pole just a little bit back from that, and really trying to square it back. And unlike the reach mode where you basically cleat the pole, I like to see the whole chute rotated. So if you're gonna square back the pole, you're easing the sheet. It's almost like the hands moving. So, if it's moving 6 inches, you're moving both hands 6 inches. The other interesting thing about it is, you're essentially doing everything you can to get away from the boat. So if you look at this from a different point of view, you want quite a bit of windward heel. So if this is the boat, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit. Here's the mast. Here's your hull, keel, whatever. And if here's your main, right? You want your spinnaker heeled so that the spinnaker kind of hangs out here. I like it so you're heeled just enough so the clue, here's your pole, right? Pulling it out. Your clue is basically at the forestay, is when you kind of got it right. And you think about it, this is what the wind sees. So this is kind of maximum spinnaker showing. So it's quite a bit of windward heel. It's enough that I think it's past, there's sort of like a little bit of windward heel that the helm goes neutral. I go past helm neutral, so I'm actually kind of steering enough that I have to counter this. There's a little pressure on the helm. Not so much that it feels stalled. I think that's bad. But that seems like the winning move, this projected area, I call it.
All right, perfect. So that's just quickly on I'm assuming on the pole adjustments as well. I mean, that's squared back, tip wherever you want to get the clues, balance. When you're in that sort of real full rocked over mode, you may have to play the pole height to get things to even out. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just draw this a little more realistically, right? It's probably, a good 10, 15 degrees of heel. So it's not insignificant, but it's not, 25, 30. But here's your boat, let's go that again, right? And so what's going to happen is, since you're like this and the chute's like this, what you want to do with the chute is have the clues parallel to the horizon. Mm-hmm. So your pole is actually being set so it's way up. If you flatten the boat, compared to the boat, it's way up, but not to the horizon. It's basically more or less even to the horizon. But what I really care about is the clues are even to the horizon. And you want maximum extension. So you're going to put it on whatever ring, probably the upper ring at this point, because now, if you had a ring up here, that might even be better. You could get out further because there's more extension. A lot of boats don't, so you don't have this option. But either way, you're trying to, in both modes, you're probably, most spinnaker poles are a bit short. So you're probably putting it on the correct ring. Whatever ring is the same height compared to the boat with the end of the spinnaker, whatever you choose there to get the maximum projection.
Awesome. Okay, so also in this downwind run mode, I guess we call it. One time I was saying with Rich Bowen down at the J24 event down in Mexico, and he had an amazing style of just he was a bit of a dancer on the back of the boat, just using his weight to just tippy toe out, tippy toe in. I mean, he was essentially driving the boat. So maybe talk a little bit about crew movement and how you guys talk through it in communication.
Absolutely. So in either mode, you're making slight variations based on how fast you're going. We talked about how the boat feels or your speedo. Maybe you have a target speed for a certain wind that you've decided on. And but the trimmer has an awful lot of feel, not just on their neck, but in their hand. And when they feel that sheet go slack, they're going to want to head up. And when they feel a lot of pressure on it, they want to go down. Hopefully, if I'm driving, I feel the same thing. Maybe I feel a little more pressure. and I feel more helm, and I say, okay, let's go down. And I don't like to just say down a lot or a little or just down. I like to put a number on it. Scott Eclay, from the coach from Hobart, was doing a bunch of tactics for us with J24. And he's like, why don't you guys put a number on it? Down 10 or down 15. It's, down 2 is very different than down 15. So we put a number on it now. And, but to your point though, Rich steering the boat with his feet, once I'm locked in like that, I really don't want to move my tiller. Even that heeled mode, I have a little pressure on it. Moving a tiller is bad. And a little bit of steering with the weight, you can steer quite a bit with your weight. And that's mostly the trimmer. So the trimmer's sitting there, they want to go up, they'll say, hey, let's go up 10, I'm light. And they'll say it as they step in. And that'll help the boat heel up. I might say the same thing. Maybe if I feel like, hey, we're just going a little too hot and I feel like a little pressure, I'm like, hey, let's go down 10. And right then the trimmer will say, okay, going down 10, and they'll step out. It's pretty cool. Like that's super fast to have that conversation.
It also, I suppose, important as well for the rest of the crew just to kind of keep their eye on the trimmer. And hey, if you're just sitting there static looking backwards, he takes a step out and maybe a little body out, help him out at the same time.
Yeah, and I think these are pretty small movements, so the trimmer can do an awful lot. The very least you don't want to counter them, right? Like maybe your job, maybe you're leaning against the lifeline, or maybe your tactician's standing up looking back. You feel the boat change angle, your natural reaction is maybe to flatten it or something that feels more. Listen to these conversations and you kind of do the opposite. If the trimmer's standing, stepping in to head up, maybe just move your shoulders just a little bit to help them, and certainly don't counter them. And, the last thing is, I think, that conversation also, if I'm tactician, and I'm looking back and I'm listening to this conversation and the trimmer says, up 10, and the driver says, all right, going up 10. I got to squash that if that's the wrong thing tactically, right? I got to say, no, hold. If we go up 10, we're going to be in dirty air, or I'm really trying to soak below this boat so we can jibe. So the tactician can call for kind of an artificially low mode or high mode too, to get ready for something like that. So especially those three need to be part of that conversation, and anybody else on the boat needs to understand what's going on so they can kind of help out a little bit.
Yeah, everybody's listening. Great point. Just real quick, what about particularly maybe a new trimmer recognizing wind shifts? I know upwind, it's very easy. The telltale's left, you're in header. How about downwind, you're in that nice kind of run mode. How can you recognize shift? What are some clues?
Yeah, so I think shifts are harder to recognize downwind. Upwind, I use a compass. You're going to get a little bit of apparent wind shift. If the wind doesn't shift at all and you get a puff, you'll probably get a couple degrees lift. And if you get a little lull, you'll probably get a couple degree header, even if the wind hasn't shifted at all. But it's just a few degrees. Downwind, you get a puff, especially in the lower end of the wind. If it's blowing 5 and then you get a puff to 9, you're going to go down 30 degrees or 20 degrees. I don't really use the compass downwind because of that. So I look at kind of, I got to decide whether this shift is pressure or if it's real. And, I think that becomes kind of a judgment call. And a lot of times I kind of think about where my apparent wind is and where I am to the mark. And I a lot of time use where the mark is as my judge of where a shift is more than the compass does.
Okay, cool. So we've got run mode, reach mode. Is there any exceptions to these? There's always exceptions to rule, but what else do we got?
Yeah, so there's these 2 modes, and when you use them, I think the general rule of thumb, it covers 90% of the scenarios, is when you're not to hull speed, you're in reach mode, and once you get to hull speed, you go into run mode. I think the first exception is there's the transition between the 2. So suppose it's blowing 5, you're not up to hull speed yet. Suppose your hull speed's 5, so you're really at 4 or 3.5. But you can start going down. If you just keep on that tight reach, you're just going to sail extra distance, and you're only going to go so much faster. But if you could go down a little bit, you're going to go better VMG and not slow down too much when it blows from 5 to 6. And then 6 to 7, then it's probably a narrow range. It's only 1 or 2 knots between fully at the forestay to feeling like you're fully in this run mode. And in that transition, I think you're in reach mode. You're still reaching around, you're just reaching lower, and you can start squaring the pole back. And this is very much a feel thing and feedback and how you're doing with other boats. I feel fast enough, I can bear off. I bear off a little bit. Hey, trimmer, let's go down 10. Let's go a deeper angle in general. And like, hey, that still feels good. Great. Let's try a little more. No, that's too far. So it's a lot of hunting and pecking, and it'll change. And a half a knot of breeze difference will make a huge difference here. So the next exception is super light air. And if you're doing this reach around mode, I find that there's sort of, if you're kind of going 45 degrees, kind of like you do upwind, you're doing just fine. Sometimes when it gets really light, to get that apparent wind to 90, you end up going like so high that you feel like you're just reaching back and forth instead of making it downwind. I mean, you just can't go enough faster to make it work. And in this case, I'll just do this exception mode. And this is like 2 knots and below. You don't even want to be out there. Like, they probably didn't start the race in this. They just didn't cancel it. And I just kind of like head straight down. Even if my chute doesn't fly, it's worth it. Like, you're just on such a reach mode if you go back and forth. And it's so slow. It takes some patience. You got to trust. You got to know your boat well enough to see if it works for your boat. But you'll watch somebody else go zipping by, and you think they're going to catch it, and by the time they jive and come back, they're behind you. A last exception is sort of similar, like only the opposite effect, and that is if you're in a boat that can plane, you get in this run mode, and you're just basically being pushed downwind, and that's fine. But if you can crack that bow wave and you can go from, pushing your hull speed 5-6 knots and then pop on a plane and go 12, well, now it's worth sailing angles again. And what you'll find is you start going so fast that the wind goes forward. You're still going fairly deep, but you just keep it on the plane. And then if it gets, if you got it right, if you're still going pretty deep, but if you start like reaching way up to stay on the plane, it's not worth sailing the extra distance. So those are 3 exceptions I can think of to those modes. In that mode, you're back in reach mode, right? The flow is over the spinnaker, you're playing to the curl again.
Seems so easy. All right, so the final go back one too. At what point do you just give up and put the Genoa back up?
You mean like in light air, or?
Yeah, that super light air mode.
I think in that super light air, once the chute completely collapses, it's really not doing much for you. And maybe you could put the jib up or something. I don't think it's any slower to have the spinnaker up. It's pretty more frustrating. But the other advantage to keeping the spin up is if you do get even a zephyr that fills it for a moment, it's really going to help you. So I'm hesitant to take it down unless it's just really obvious it can't fly.
All right.
You're hoping they're canceled at that point, unless you're winning.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for all the insight. Appreciate it. I think this is a good primer for any Spinnaker trimmer and get them quickly up to speed.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. I think I do believe in sort of talking through the theories so they know what we're trying to do. And even if you don't have much time, you just do it right before that race that's light. You say, hey, we're probably going to be in this reach mode. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And then when we have that conversation downwind, they already kind of tuned into what's going on.
Sweet. All right, man. Well, have a great day. We'll catch you next week.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Thanks, Mike.